Let's be entirely honest with ourselves for a single, unglamorous second. Human Prehistory was not a majestic documentary narrated by a soothing British gentleman, but rather a chaotic, multi-millennial comedy of errors where our ancestors barely survived by acting as the ultimate, panic-stricken corner cutters of the animal kingdom. We like to imagine early hominids as these stoic, muscle-bound apex predators marching across the Pleistocene landscape with fierce determination and burning torches. But the actual fossil record paints a drastically different, deeply embarrassing picture of a bunch of weak, naked primates just desperately winging it day by day. They were essentially running a glorified, zero-hour contract side hustle where the corporate benefits package consisted entirely of not being violently digested by a creature with teeth the size of bananas. Every single day was a brand new, unscripted episode of trying not to die from a stubbed toe or a mildly disgruntled badger, and our collective survival relied heavily on a highly specialized strategy of weaponized cowardice and aggressive opportunism. Now, grab your crudely sharpened rocks, look out for giant predators, and let's open the prehistoric case file. To truly understand the depths of our ancestral desperation, we have to travel back about 1.4 million years to the sunny, yet thoroughly hostile paradise of Fuentenueva III in southern Spain. Here, we find our early human ancestors, likely Homo antiquus or some very confused Homo erectus cousins, operating at the absolute peak of their scavenger hustle. These guys were not hunting mammoths. Let us completely shatter that Hollywood myth right now. If a group of these fragile primates tried to take down a healthy, multi-ton prehistoric elephant with nothing but a few pointy sticks and a dream, it wouldn't be a glorious hunt. It would be an immediate, highly efficient industrial flattening. No, our ancestors were strictly looking for the ultimate culinary jackpot, a colossal, pre-packaged meal that was already entirely incapable of fighting back. And on this particular day, the universe gifted them what looked like the ultimate free buffet. A massive, ancient mammoth had clumsily wandered into a treacherous patch of quicksand and clay, becoming hopelessly, beautifully immobilized. It was a giant, screaming mountain of protein trapped in nature's worst concrete mixer, completely unable to escape and slowly expiring under the hot Spanish sun. When our ancestors stumbled upon this scene, they didn't see a majestic tragedy of nature. They saw a massive corporate promotion with zero upfront costs. This was the ultimate low-risk, high-reward dinner plan, or so they foolishly assumed. The mammoth was stuck fast, sinking deeper into the sludge, creating a ticking clock for anyone who wanted a piece of the action. But there was a massive catch to this supposed free lunch. In the Pleistocene ecosystem, a giant, dying mammal is essentially a massive, ringing dinner bell that broadcasts a high-frequency signal to every terrifying nightmare creature within a 50-mile radius. Our ancestors weren't the only ones looking to exploit this unfortunate situation, and they certainly weren't the biggest players on the corporate ladder. As they crept toward the edge of the mud pit, clutching their pathetic little stone flakes, they realized they were about to enter a highly competitive, incredibly stressful turf war. They weren't stepping into a peaceful kitchen. They were stepping into a high-stakes, chaotic crime scene where the local management was about to show up and violently enforce the company policy on trespassing. Enter the actual, undisputed middle management nightmare of the Pleistocene European landscape, Pachycrocuta brevirostris. If you want to put a face to this creature, do not think of the laughably goofy, cackling hyenas from modern animated movies. Instead, picture an absolute unit of an apex predator, a terrifying, hyper-engineered bone-crushing machine weighing well over 150 kilograms, boasting a skull built like a solid steel anvil and a bite force capable of effortlessly snapping a mammoth's femur like a cheap piece of kindling. These giant hyenas were the supreme rulers of the local scavenger economy, and they did not take kindly to uninvited, hairless primates trying to poach from their regional supply chain. While our ancestors were busy congratulating themselves on finding a giant, immobilized mud buffet, a pack of these heavily armored nightmare dogs was already closing in on the perimeter, ready to initiate a highly aggressive, hostile takeover of the entire operation. What followed at Fuentenueva III was not a heroic, cinematic battle for survival, but rather an incredibly tense, deeply awkward, and utterly clunky culinary standoff. When we examine the archaeological metrics, we see that our ancestors didn't stand their ground like brave warriors. They immediately pivoted to a strategy of frantic, panicked micromanagement. They knew that a fair, one-on-one fight with a single Pachycrocuta meant instant death and an immediate promotion to the status of hyena kibble. So instead, they resorted to the ultimate cowardly survival hustle. The entire scene quickly devolved into a frantic game of smash and grab. While the giant hyenas swarmed the exposed upper parts of the stuck mammoth, tearing away massive chunks of flesh and aggressively asserting their dominance, our ancestors were forced to skulk around the chaotic periphery like desperate, unpaid interns trying to steal office supplies while the boss isn't looking. The physical execution of this prehistoric heist was about as unglamorous as it gets. Imagine a terrified hominid, desperately trying to blend into the surrounding shrubbery, looking exactly like a sad stickman disguised as a bush. They had to wait for the exact moment the massive hyenas were distracted by a particularly juicy piece of mammoth rib, then frantically dash into the treacherous, sucking mud pit, hack off a small, questionable piece of meat using a sharp pebble, and sprint for dear life before the alpha predator noticed the theft. The stone tool technology of the time, the Oldowan toolkit, consisted essentially of river cobbles that someone had clumsily smashed together to create a mildly sharp edge. Trying to saw through thick, fibrous mammoth hide with a basic stone flake while a 150-kilo monster intensely stares you down is peak workplace anxiety. It was an incredibly inefficient, high-stress hustle where a single slip-up meant losing your fingers, your dignity, or your entire life to a creature that viewed you as nothing more than a light, crunchy appetizer. To make the entire situation even more profoundly degrading for our ancestors, the giant hyenas didn't just outmuscle them. They actively outmanaged them through sheer psychological warfare. Pachycrocuta didn't just stand there snarling, they completely occupied the space. As they gorged themselves on the trapped mammoth, they established a literal perimeter of dominance, treating the entire mud pit as their personal executive lounge. Our ancestors were left to watch from a safe, humiliating distance, clutching their pathetic little rocks, waiting for the literal crumbs to fall from the table. It was a stark, brutal reminder of where humans actually stood on the prehistoric social ladder. We weren't the kings of the jungle or the masters of the plains. We were the hyperventilating, corner-cutting opportunists of the mud pit, entirely reliant on the fact that the actual apex predators might eventually get too full to notice us sneaking around their leftovers. When modern forensic scientists and archaeologists finally excavated the crime scene at Fuente Nueva 3, they didn't find a grand monument to human ingenuity. Instead, they uncovered the ultimate prehistoric receipt of our ancestral humiliation. The taphonomy of the site, which is just a fancy scientific term for analyzing how a bunch of ancient garbage got buried together, reveals a hilarious dataset. Mixed right in with the primitive stone tools our ancestors dropped in their absolute panic, researchers uncovered a staggering mountain of evidence left behind by the competition. Specifically, 220 fossilized hyena droppings. Yes, you heard that correctly. The definitive scientific proof of this epic Pleistocene turf war is a massive pile of prehistoric coprolites. The Pachycrocuta pack didn't just aggressively out-eat our ancestors. They spent the entire weekend casually and intensely defecating all over the crime scene to mark their territory while staring down our terrified, bush-disguised relatives. This fossilized scatfest tells us everything we need to know about who actually won the great mud buffet of Spain. While our ancestors managed to desperately saw off a few scraps of meat with their crude pebble tools, the giant hyenas completely dominated the carcass, consuming so much calcium from crushing the mammoth's bones that their fossilized droppings turned a distinct, bright white color. It is a beautifully ironic forensic snapshot. The archaeological record clearly shows that while humans were trying to run a sneaky, zero-hour contract side hustle on the periphery, the hyenas were running a highly organized, corporate-approved feast. We like to write history books celebrating our rise to global dominance, but the literal dirt under our feet proves that 1.4 million years ago, our family tree spent a very stressful weekend getting completely outmanaged, outmuscled, and psychologically broken by a pack of giant, aggressively defecating nightmare dogs. Let's take a slow, deep breath and look at the big picture here. When we look in the mirror today, we have to realize that modern humanity only exists because our ancient ancestors were the absolute undisputed masters of being sneaky, cowardly, and incredibly lucky. We didn't survive the brutal trials of the Pleistocene by being the bravest or the strongest. We survived because when the giant, terrifying monsters of the past showed up to claim the room, we had the common sense to grab our scraps, hide in a bush, and live to fail another day.